What if I told you that the most powerful military on Earth just blinked first? What if the country that spends more on defense than the next 10 nations combined suddenly found itself staring down a 30-minute countdown? And nobody in Washington wanted to talk about it. 3 words were quietly circulating in the back channels of global diplomacy last week, and those 3 words changed everything. Iran said no, not in a press conference, not through a spokesperson, directly, firmly, with the clock ticking. And right now, millions of people are asking the same question. Did the United States actually back down from Iran? Stay right here, because what you're about to hear in the next few minutes is not what the mainstream media is telling you. And once you understand the full picture, you will never look at this standoff the same way again. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to the Professor Walter Report, where we break down the stories that actually matter, without the spin, without the noise. Hit that subscribe button right now, drop a like on this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear the truth, because this story, this one is too important to scroll past. Let me take you back to where this all started, because context is everything. The relationship between the United States and Iran has never been simple. Decades of tension, sanctions, proxy conflicts, nuclear negotiations that go nowhere, and a constant game of pressure and counter-pressure have defined this relationship for over 40 years. But something shifted recently. The tone changed. The urgency escalated. And then came the moment that sent shockwaves through intelligence communities from Tel Aviv to Tokyo. Iran issued what insiders are calling a 30-minute ultimatum, and the world held its breath, waiting to see how Washington would respond. Now, before you jump to conclusions, let's be precise about what this ultimatum actually was, because the framing matters enormously here. According to sources familiar with back-channel communications, Iran delivered a very direct message through diplomatic intermediaries, a message that essentially said, if certain conditions were not acknowledged within a specific window of time, Iran reserved the right to take unilateral action. 30 minutes. That's not a negotiating timeline. That's a pressure tactic designed to force a reaction, to expose whether the other side is truly willing to escalate or whether they're bluffing. And here's where it gets fascinating. Because the response from Washington, or rather the lack of an immediate public response, told a very different story than the one American officials would like you to believe. Think about this for a second. When America is confident, when America feels it holds the upper hand, it doesn't go quiet. It makes noise, it holds press conferences, it sends aircraft carriers and makes sure every satellite and every news channel sees those carriers moving into position. That's the American playbook, and it has worked for decades because the perception of overwhelming power is often more effective than the actual use of it. But in the hours following Iran's ultimatum, that playbook was nowhere to be seen. There were no dramatic announcements. No Secretary of State appearing on camera with fire in his eyes. No joint statement from allied nations promising coordinated consequences. There was, for a significant window of time, something that felt very much like silence. And in geopolitics, silence is never actually silent. Silence is a language. And what it was saying in this moment was deeply uncomfortable for a lot of people in Washington. Now here's a question worth sitting with. Does restraint equal retreat? Because that's really the heart of what people are debating right now. There is a version of this story where American officials made a calculated decision not to escalate, not because they were afraid, but because they understood that taking the bait of a 30-minute ultimatum would hand Iran exactly the narrative victory it was looking for. A provoked America is a dangerous America, yes. But a provoked America is also a politically vulnerable America, especially heading into a period where domestic opinion on foreign military engagement is deeply divided. The Professor Walter Report has been tracking this dynamic for months, And what we've consistently seen is that Iran has become extraordinarily sophisticated at playing the information war. They understand that in the modern era, perception shapes reality just as much as actual military capability does. If Iran can make it appear that the United States hesitated, that America blinked, that the most powerful nation on earth paused before a country under massive economic sanctions, that's worth more to Tehran than a dozen missile tests. It changes how regional actors calculate their own risk. It changes how allies in the Gulf think about American security guarantees. This is not just about Iran and America. This is about the entire global order and who gets to write its rules going forward. And this leads us to the next layer of this story that almost nobody is talking about: the role of the nuclear negotiation timeline. Iran's 30-minute ultimatum did not happen in a vacuum. It happened against the backdrop of stalled nuclear talks, escalating enrichment levels, and a diplomatic environment where Tehran has been systematically removing the incentives for Washington to stay patient. Every time Iran advances its enrichment program, it narrows the window for a diplomatic solution and increases the pressure on American policymakers to either act or accept a nuclear-capable Iran as a strategic reality. The ultimatum was a test of exactly how much pressure Washington could absorb before it either capitulated to Iran's terms or committed to a path that could lead to direct military conflict. So what actually happened in that 30-minute window, based on everything pieced together from regional reporting and diplomatic sources? It appears that American officials chose a middle path. They did not publicly capitulate. They did not issue an aggressive counterthreat. What they did was communicate, through the same back channels, that certain American positions remained firm, while simultaneously signaling a willingness to continue engagement through diplomatic frameworks. In plain language, they didn't say yes, they didn't say no, and they bought time. To Iran's leadership, that ambiguity may itself have been interpreted as a form of yielding. To American hawks watching from Capitol Hill, that same ambiguity looked like weakness. Both readings exist simultaneously, and that's precisely why this story has exploded across international media. Here's a question I want you to think about, and I genuinely want to hear your answer in the comments below. Do you think the United States made the right call by not immediately escalating? The case for restraint is real. Military conflict with Iran in the current regional environment, with ongoing instability in multiple theaters and a fragile energy market, is an argument for not pulling triggers quickly. The case against restraint is equally real. Every time a red line gets blurred, adversaries recalibrate and become bolder. History has shown this pattern repeatedly. What makes the current Iran situation uniquely dangerous is the speed at which it's moving. We're not talking about slow-moving diplomacy with months to course-correct. We're talking about a geopolitical environment where 30 minutes is now apparently a reasonable ultimatum window, where one miscalculation, one misread signal, could push two sides into a confrontation that neither has a clear plan for managing. Let's also talk about what Iran's internal politics are doing to this equation. The hardline factions within Iran's power structure have been pushing for a more aggressive posture for years. The 30-minute ultimatum was, in part, a signal to those internal factions that the current Iranian leadership is not going to be pushed around. It was as much about domestic politics inside Iran as it was about sending a message to Washington. When you see an aggressive move from Tehran, you always need to ask, who was this move designed to impress, the Americans or the audience inside Iran? The underlying structural tensions have not been resolved. The nuclear program continues to advance. The sanctions continue to bite, but have clearly not broken Iran's strategic ambition. The regional proxy network across Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon continues to create flashpoints. What the 30-minute ultimatum episode has exposed is just how thin the margins are. how close the situation is to a point where the informal rules that have kept direct confrontation at bay could break down entirely. For the United States, the strategic challenge is genuinely difficult. A military strike on Iran's nuclear facilities carries enormous risks, but continued patience, if it's read as weakness, carries its own risks. The erosion of deterrence credibility, with every state actor watching how Washington manages this. There is no good option here. There are only options with different types of costs attached to them. This is not just a story about missiles and diplomacy and nuclear centrifuges. This is a story about power, about perception, about the high-stakes chess game that determines how the world is ordered. The 30-minute ultimatum was a move on that board, and the game is far from over. Based on everything we're seeing, it may be entering its most consequential phase yet. So here's what I want you to do right now. Share this video, send it to someone following this story, because the conversation we need to be having is not happening loudly enough. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think America backed down? Do you think restraint was the right call? And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button and turn on notifications, because this story is developing fast, and we will be right here covering every move as it unfolds. This is the Professor Walter Report, and we'll see you in the next one.